It seems to me, that the government and the minister's attitude to farm families in the west of Ireland, where I come from, is live horse and you get grass. And for a long time we're waiting for things to improve, but the longer we wait, the worse they seem to be getting for most of us. I'm sure many in the government will realise just how angry people were during the election campaign when we had Fine Gael and Labour people going around the doorsteps telling us in the border counties and in the west to keep the recovery going, because we've seen very little sign of any recovery in that part of the world, and we still see no sign of it. And we're the first place to see the downturn when things get bad, and we're the last place to see any recovery, and we have seen no sign of any of this recovery as yet. I wonder sometimes about the policy that the government is pursuing and what its aim is. And I wonder, when the minister hears farmers saying that they cannot survive, what does he really think, or what does he say when he gets to the cabinet table about that? Is it the plan for the minister to leave the small farmers to sink or swim? Is it the plan to let them sink, and we'll be left with that magic number, the much heralded 20,000 viable farmers left in Ireland? There are, of course, a lot of the people on small farms where I come from in that part of the world are encouraged to get off farm work. But the reality is there are no jobs off the farm or anywhere else. And the last lifeline that many struggling small farmers had was taken away when the farm assist was cut, to the extent that most people lost that payment. And Joan Burton, as minister here at the time, claimed that there was no cut to core social welfare payments. But replacing farm assist with job seekers allowance would have been funny if it was not so tragic for the small farmers in the west of Ireland. Job seeking by the standards of the Department of Social Protection is not compatible with farming. Being available for work by the standards of the Department of Social Protection does not acknowledge the position of the small farmer struggling to make enough from his or her small holding to survive, and they need the safety net that the Farm Assist programme provided. The stress that small farmers are under financially is exacerbated by the stress that they are now under due to inspections. The inspection regime is run in such a way as to suggest that it is not about improving standards or modifying behaviour for the better, but to intimidate and to discourage farmers. Inspections should not resemble a police raid. There is no one saying that the standards should not be maintained, or that anyone should be allowed to lower the high standards in Irish farming. But a more cooperative and constructive regime would benefit everyone. But for some reason, the Minister and your department prefers the heavy hand rather than the helping hand. And indeed, I hope in the negotiations that are going on around government in these days that issue of farm inspections is something that is dealt with, because it really needs to be dealt with for small farmers, particularly around the country, who fear the call that there is somebody going to arrive on their farm from the department. The Minister needs to defend the most important people, and the government needs to defend the most important people. And that is the ones who are actually producing the goods, who are producing the farm produce. The beef industry has become monopolised and industrialised, and farmers are penalised on the basis of spurious conditions and specifications set by factories. Beef farmers have to dance to the tune of weight restrictions, numbers of movements and age of cattle. We are told that this regime is somehow consumer-led, but I have yet to find the beef consumer in Ballymun or indeed in Berlin who cares or knows whether an animal was 34 months old or 36 months old, or whether it was moved 3 times or 4 times in its lifetime when they go in to buy a piece of steak. What consumers want to know is that the animal is grass-fed, that it is free-roaming and that it is not riddled with hormones. And that is what the Irish farmer offers, the highest quality beef. But the way the factories manipulate the market with their own huge feedlots is not fair or transparent, and goes against that image that we portray across the world, and which is the reality for most family farms, that the way beef is reared and until it reaches the farm gate. I also would like to know, and it was mentioned earlier on in the speeches about TTIP, about what the government's approach is going to be to that. So far it has been very much a lapdog approach, which has meant that we don't even know what has been negotiated on our behalf, and the repercussions for Ireland could be enormous. There were documents leaked recently by Greenpeace last week which seem to indicate that the US is making very serious demands regarding lowering the standards of protection for the environment and indeed for public health. These leaks show that the precautionary principle maintained by the European Union, which ensures that we have to prove a product is safe before it is released onto the market, is not being defended, and we are in danger of introducing the United States version of that, which is that you have to prove that the product is dangerous in order to take it off the market, which is in effect turning the precautionary principle on its head. The EU has higher trade protection standards in health, in human and animal and plant life when compared with the US, And big business in the US is trying to reduce these regulations, while the EU remains very much mute. The leaks show that the US side wants to be able to scrap existing EU rules in areas such as food labelling or approval of dangerous chemicals. And these things they call barriers to free trade. Most of us would recognise that they are dangers to human health. The selling point and the main image for our agri-food across the world is that it is clean and green, and that is our claim to fame in international markets. But to keep that image, that clean green image, we have to maintain the highest possible standards. And according to Greenpeace in the leaked documents, the way is being cleared for a race to the bottom in environment, consumer protection and public health standards. The US proposals include an obligation on the EU to inform American industries of any planned regulations in advance and to allow them the same input into EU regulatory process as EU firms. Before the EU could even pass a regulation, it would have to go through a gruelling impact assessment process in which the bloc would have to show interested US parties that no voluntary measures or less exacting regulatory ones were possible, the Greenpeace representative stated. GM foods would also find a widening window into Europe, with the US pushing for a working group to adopt what they call a low-level presence initiative. This would allow the import of cargo containing traces of unauthorised GM strains into the European Union. The EU currently blocks these foods because of safety and indeed cross-pollinisation concerns. And I just want to deal with a measure that was mentioned a couple of moments ago by the Fine Gael deputy in regard to Sinn Féin's wealth tax. Sinn Féin had indeed a proposal for a wealth tax. It was for people who had assets worth in excess of €1 million. Unfortunately, I don't know of any farmers in where I come from, in South Leitrim or West Cavan or that part of the world, that have an asset of over €1 million, and certainly not farmland of that size of an asset. And anyway, it was our position that the exclusion from that would be working farmland. It was really a measure which was targeted at big business which had huge shares and huge dividends from that particular part of industry. So, to state that somehow or other would have an impact on the farming community is an absolute nonsense. What the Minister's job is to ensure that agreements like TTIP do not damage Ireland. Like the doctor, the Minister has to be firstly charged with doing no harm. And that is really the essence of what we need to ensure happens here. I wonder, is the Minister confident that TTIP will do us no harm, or any of these other trade negotiations? We certainly feel that we have no confidence, but they are going to do huge harm to the Irish agricultural sector. The reality is that there is no Minister standing up for rural Ireland. There is no Minister standing up for the farmers that I represent in my part of County Leitrim. Small farmers who are eking out a living on maybe 25 or 30 acres of land with a handful of cows and trying to rear a family and send their children to school. Those people need protection, and they need protection from big business which is manipulating the market and destroying their income. And the Minister needs to stand up firmly and proudly against that particular sector. Who is protecting us if the Minister is not going to protect us?